Welcome back to the program, and that code 254 there is done by Amos Ogweri leads us to this particular discussion, and we want to talk about matters illegal firearms. That's the discussion we had last week, and it's a conversation that we want to continue today as we enlighten you on what should be done and what is being done to try and deal with that problem. In studio with me is Dr. Francis Sang. He's a member of the Committee on Citizen Participation in Security, that is CPS. He is also a former director of Criminal Investigation Department. At the time it was known as CID. At the moment it's known as DCI. He has written a book called A Noble but Onerous Duty. And if you go to chapter 1, if you want to understand some of the issues when you talk about illegal firearms, he has a whole chapter, Perspectives from Small Arms Diplomacy. That is a book that he has written. And it is a book with a total of 13 chapters. And if you get time, it's just a book worth reading so that you get to understand some of the things that he raises in this particular book more deeply. Dr. Welcome to the program.
Thank you very much.
Yes, and hope you've been well.
I've been well. I've just come from Naivasha on
Yes.
the issues of citizen participation in security for lay leaders from Mount Kenya region.
Yes. So you are taking the conversation a notch higher.
Absolutely.
Reaching out to religious leaders among other stakeholders.
Yes, so that each and every person can be responsible for their own security. Yes.
Which is key. So because you say see it,
You see, you say, you hear, you say, you suspect, you say.
it.
Yes.
Let's begin by the question of illegal firearms, especially northern part of the country has borne the brunt of it all, and we know illegal firearms remain a problem in that particular region. Key things first, what might you, attribute the challenges we have seen in northern part of the country when you talk about illegal firearms, parts like Baringo, in Tiati, Samburu, and all those? What may be the key problem there?
Yeah, there are very many factors, but I just also want to give you a point which I just talked to you last week, that in the northern part of Kenya, the research which has actually been done indicates that there are over 560,000 to 650 illicit arms in the wrong hands. So that actually tells you that there is a problem, because you have to ask yourself, why are the people arming themselves with the illicit arms? So there is a retrogressive culture which is actually permeating to this particular problem in the region. The culture of cat wrestling in the name, a case of robbery with violence in case of cat wrestling, which has actually been going on for over 100 years. And yet, this problem has not actually been fully addressed. However, the government has done quite a lot of measures to address this particular problem, but you find that the problem keeps on reoccurring from now and then.
The question is why?
Yeah, there are factors which I've actually told you, the culture, the retrogressive culture. Why are people still inclined towards cat wrestling? Which means that the education has not actually been ingrained in that particular community. The aspect of carrying a culture and glorifying the gun, that is one of the things which each and every member of those pastoralist community feel that if one is not actually having a gun, is not a man. The issue of dowry, to marry a pastoralist community lady, you have to have more than 100 cattle. And this means that you need to raid your neighbor so that you can be able to get a lady. And these are the retrogressive culture I'm talking about. So it really needs a lot of education so that you can be able to change the mindset, so that they can be able to have a different feel that it's not a gun alone which would be able to improve the economic standing.
Are we doing enough as a country to ensure that northeastern or north, the residents of northern part of the country have access to the education that you're talking about, so that perhaps we try and change their mindset?
I think with the new constitution dispensation of 210, whereby we have the devolution aspect, this would now be able to make a lot of changes, which we have actually been able to see that the government is actually voting in some funds directly to those communities. Like, for instance, Turkana County got the highest budget so that they can actually be able to bring them up to reach to the other communities who have actually been able to go far much ahead. Build more schools, bring in some education programs for them so that they can now be able to reach. You remember, Martin, that some of these communities would be able to say that they are going to Kenya as if that part of Kenya is not part. So these are some of the myths which we need actually to bring and carry out some education so that they can be able to change their mindset and reach the other Kenyans. Yes.
Granted, some of the problems that you say first northern part of the country include cattle rustling, some of those traditional practices that they do, and they are to blame. But if you look at the figures we are giving, between 560,000 to 650,000 illegal firearms in the wrong hands, did we sleep on the job perhaps as a country so much that all these guns, by the time somebody possessed one gun, illegal firearm, then we're talking about two, all the way to 650,000. Is it not an indictment of us as a country on our part?
You see, for quite a long time, there have actually been disarmament programs, which is starting even from 1984. But all these disarmament programs have actually not been able to be successful because the modality probably which is actually being held, you find that people have not been able, you see, when we're talking about disarmament, we are talking about disarmament of mind, that you need to disarm your mind. You're being held. You find that people have not been able, you see, when we're talking about disarmament, we are talking about disarmament of mind, that you need to disarm your mind. You find that if it is physical disarmament, you ask somebody to surrender their guns. The government gives them amnesty. They hide one gun, which is more functional, and then they give you a gun, which is not working. So they have not actually disarmed their mind. So all this, because of retrogressive cultures, which it is, I told you about a case in those parts whereby when a boy is actually born, you will hear a gunshot being shot in the air, glorifying that there's more additional gun to that particular community. So which means that they have not actually been able to disarm their mind. So we need actually to disarm them by bringing up some education programs and actually even making some educational tours for those communities to visit the other communities in the country so that they can be able to see how far they've gone, how far they've been actually left behind. Those are some of the things which we should be able to expose them. Build more school, and then be able to bring role models from those communities to go and talk to them so that they can now be able to see that it's not a gun which is everything. Yes.
So what you're simply saying is, because we have seen the government talk about disarmament and of course some communities crying foul, you're concentrating on us while leaving the other, and then you're exposing us to danger. What you're simply saying is, so long as we concentrate on our physical disarmament and not the disarmament of mind, what we have been seeing in the past is likely to not to achieve much, and perhaps that's the reason why it has not worked.
Absolutely. That's why even the government has actually come up with a very elaborate program for the northern Kenya. And that's why you have actually been able to see that there have actually been recruitment of the KPR, the NPR now, who have actually been recruited within those communities, within Baringo, Marakwet, Turkana, and Pokot. And these are the people because you know, Martin, that these people have not actually been surrendering their arms because they have always been feeling insecure. That if the moment you disarm one community and you don't disarm the other, and then giving the security to the other, then they will be vulnerable to the other group. So what the government has actually been able to do is to deploy the KPR, the Kenya National Police Reservists, for those communities, so that they pacify the area where they have already been able to get their arms, and then they put in the KPR to guard them so that they can now be able, so that they cannot be vulnerable now to the other opposing community. Yes.
And there are those who have also challenged the question of deployment of those KPR officers, saying that it may not be the solution to the challenges facing those regions.
But you see now, those who are actually been challenging are some of the politicians, some of them who have actually been involved. Because a research which was done by the Parliamentary Committee in 2009 indicated very clearly that the politicians are the ones who are behind these issues of cat wrestling for their own political interests. And these are the people who have actually been criticizing the measures which the government is taking in respect to addressing this problem. Because I feel that if they would have been keen in ensuring that this proper disarmament in their areas, they would have convinced their people. Why do they convince them to vote for them? I believe that they can be able to do more than what they have actually been doing. Yes.
And so if we know that it's politicians who have been, who are behind the question of cattle rustling, for example, which is a problem in some parts of this country, what are we doing to ensure that we reach out to the politicians so that perhaps as we disarm the mind of the locals, we disarm the mind of the politician first?
Now we are now approaching them through the citizen participation in security. This is what the government has actually been able to do. This is the committee where I am now, and we are now approaching them in a more elaborate approach. We have actually approached quite a number of sectors, including the parliamentarian. We have already been able to meet the members, the Committee of Defense and Security. And we have actually been able to tell them where there is a problem. And if they revert to their recommendation, which they had already made, and we are now working towards coming up even with a bill which would like the parliamentarian to address into that particular problem, because it is a problem which is also known to them. We are now, like last week I was in Eldoret, and we brought in about 300 chiefs from Turkana, from Marakwet, from Baringo, and West Pokot, to discuss with them about what are the underlying causes of this perennial problem.
So what are some of the underlying causes?
Those
as per your discussion.
Absolutely. These are some of the cultures which we are actually talking about. The issue of the politician also came in. The issues of Libonis. You know, those who believe and always bless the warriors who normally goes to raid others. They bless them and they tell them that you go and raid. We have already made sure that everything is okay and you'll be able to get animals. And wherever they actually bless them and they succeed, the Libonis are the ones who are going to give in the best animals which has already been raided from the opposite community. So these are some of the education aspects which we are now talking about. And we would like the chiefs to make sure that they implement those recommendations which we came up with in Eldoret.
We have seen situations in this country where, especially in those areas you're talking about, today we have an attack in, say, Tiati, and then after that there are some measures that are taken to try and pacify the area, and then you see some, restoration of some relative calm for a period of 1 year, for example.
Yes.
And then after even a year or two, then the same problem occurs. Are you seeing a certain pattern in the way these attacks are done? And then perhaps, is it something that is periodic?
No, you see,
And then how do we deal with it?
this is a problem because if we have to learn from the best practices, we must be able to learn from what has actually been happening all along. What is the time when these people normally raid? We know very well that they normally raid when the moon is up there. And this is their own belief. So this is the time when we should actually be more proactive. And I totally agree with you that we have actually been, at times, when a problem has actually been able to occur, that's the time when we are very active on the ground. We need actually to be active 24/7. So that wherever there is any problem, we must always be there. We must be able to read the mind of the cat rustlers so that you can be able to preempt whatever they are planning. We must be able to have intelligence, kind of, so that we know what is happening, so that we can preempt before they go and raid their own colleagues. But I believe what the government is now doing would be able to make a lot of difference because the police have already been equipped with the modern vehicles, modern weapons. We have the KPR, and we believe that something different, which we have actually failed over 100 years, would be realized soon.
And so when we talk about the question of illegal firearms, that's not a preserve of a northern part of the country alone. That's, at that level, we now know what the government is doing. At the national level, what are we doing as a country to try and ensure that this is not a problem we should be encountering today?
You see, Kenya has not been able to have quite a number of conflicts in terms of internal conflict which demands arms. But you see, we are actually surrounded by neighbors who have instability in their own countries. And this has actually been the product of quite a number of illicit arms which flows into the country. And these arms have actually been able even to find their way into the urban areas. And that's why these arms have actually been used to commit armed robberies. The government has actually been able to come up with various mechanisms. At the national level, they have actually been able to establish what we call the Kenya National Focal Point, which deals with the issues of arms, which brings together all government agencies to address the problem of small arms. And they have actually been able even to come up with a policy to deal with this issue of small arms, which is now, the policy is about now to be translated into a law, because we have an outdated kind of a law in the Firearms, Chapter 114, Laws of Kenya. So this policy will now be able to address some of these issues of the small arms to find out the root causes of this particular problem, how can it be done, what are the best practices which other countries have already been able to apply. So the issues which is actually looked in this particular policy is the issues of stockpile management, because we have actually been able to see that some of these arms in state-owned armories find their way to illicit market. How can we be able to restrict police officers from not even selling ammunition from their own armories, which will feed now to those cat rustlers?
So I'll be talking about the question of outdated, especially the policy that you're talking about and the policy that we are having now, and what are the pros of this particular policy compared to the other. But we need to take a quick commercial break, and when we come back, I'll be continuing with the discussion. I'm speaking to Dr. Francis Sang. He's a member of the Committee on Citizen Participation in Security, CPS, but he is also the former director of Criminal Investigations Department, talking to us about the whole question of illegal firearms. See you after this short break. Welcome back to the program. If you're just joining us, I have in studio with me Dr. Francis Sang. Is a member of the Committee on Citizen Participation in Security, that is CPS, and we are talking about the question of illegal firearms and how far we are as a country in trying to deal with the problem. And Dr. Sang, before we took that break, we were talking about the Kenya National Focal Point, and you did indicate that there's a new policy that is coming into place so that we replace the outdated policy that has been operational. Perhaps if you can just try and share with us the key highlights of the new policy that makes it stand out as compared to the other policy.
The new policy is in line with an international agreement which Kenya has actually signed. Because the issues of small arms cannot actually be dealt with by one single country. So Kenya has actually been able, the policy which I'm talking about is actually compatible with the international agreement. And one of them is on the policy is institutional framework, that we should be able to put in the institution which would be able to manage the issues of the small arm. Because if there are no institution like the Kenya National Focal Point, which would be able now to deal with this problem, then the aspect of small arm wouldn't be dealt with. The other one is stockpile management and destruction. I think you have already seen sometimes the National Police Service actually banning some collected firearms. So that is one of the things in terms of all the arms in the state position must be marked. And this is incompatible. Each and every country who is signatory now to that agreement has to mark all the firearms in their state position, so that when you find a firearms in Uganda or Tanzania, you will be able to trace it back to Kenya. Then there is also the issues of capacity building and public education, that we need actually to capacitate the law enforcement agencies, civilians on the bad effect of the small arms needs. The issue of research is also very important, that we need actually to carry out research as to why there is that aspect of supply and demand. Why are people demanding arms? So that you can be able, because without demand, there will be no inner supply. So we have actually been able to come up with measures which we should be able to break that chain, whereby there's that kind of demand. And then the other one is regional cooperation aspect, that you need actually to work with other member countries, because without working with them, then you won't be able to succeed. And lastly is the issues of legislation. That without strong legislation in a member country, then the gun runners will always be able to operate in the country with the weakest legislation. Those are some of the aspects which we have actually put in that policy. Yeah.
When you talk about the question of demand and supply, very key, by the way, and you say there is need to do more research. But do you have any research findings that point out to the problem why there's been demand and then supply, be it at the national level, regional, and perhaps global level?
Yeah, there are quite a number of researches which has already been done. At the international level, we have had what we call small arms survey. It's an international renowned research organization which has actually carried out research here. We have our own grown research institution like SRIC, Security Research Institution, which we have here in Kenya, and have already been able to carry out various research. They have already been able to come up with, and these are some of the issues of implementation which needs actually to be undertaken very seriously. Otherwise, we can do a lot of research, and yet implementation is really wanting. So these are some of the things which the policy is actually addressing, on how we can be able to utilize researches which has already been undertaken. Yes.
When you talk about the question of Kenya National Focal Point, which is a very critical institution, if you ask me, but then we are talking about in terms of devolution. There are people who need these services. Is it based in Nairobi?
It is actually based in Nairobi.
So how do you ensure?
But they have actually been able to create they are now working within the police within the county, so that they have already been able to train, because they have not been able to open their offices within the counties. They are now they have carried out some training with the regions or the counties, and they are now working together to implement the policy, because they cannot be able to implement this particular policy at the regional or county level if they do not have those who implement. But their work here is to oversee the implementation of those particular policy at the county level. But in future, they will be able to open their own offices, just like the one which they have in Bruce House. Yes.
So that's well said. The question of when we talk about supply and demand, and we know the efforts that the government has been doing to try and bring to an end the question of small firearms. But then, so long as there's demand for this particular problem, then you expect that there's going to be supply.
Yes.
We have a problem when you talk about regional issue. You talk about countries that we neighbor, that are our neighbors, and they are facing security challenges like Somalia.
Yeah.
Are we saying that with this kind of porous borders and the question of demand still high, it is likely to be a problem dealing with this problem?
Now, you see, this has actually been a problem, because if Kenya alone deals with the issues of small arms, then we wouldn't be able to succeed. At the international level, the member states, I used actually to attend annual meetings when I was the executive director of the regional center on small arms, covering 15 countries. And one of the things was the involvement of other member states. And one good thing which I would like to announce here is that for the first time, there have been a treaty which is called Arms Trade Treaty, which was signed on 24th of December 2014 by 153 countries of the United Nations. And this treaty makes imperative for the member states to address the issues of export and importation and transfer of arms. Wherever they sell, it must actually be sold to the governments, not non-state actors. So this thing would actually be able to control the importation, exportation, and transfer of these arms. And now the member states are now domesticating that treaty into their own legislation, so that they can now be able to deal with the issues of that. If you import some arms, let's say from UK or US, there is a process that would be made sure that the arms arrive at its destination without any form of diversion. And this has actually been able to safeguard the issues whereby you could be able to find some arms which has been imported from a certain country, finding their way to areas where there's conflict. So this one will now be able to safeguard, and Kenya was the one amongst 13 countries which fought for this treaty to be signed. So Kenya has actually played a very major role at international level.
And when you talk about Kenya was among the first countries to try and push for the domestication of this treaty. Are we also, as we domesticate it, are we walking the talk to ensure that the provision of that
absolutely,
treaty?
and that's why that particular policy is actually there. In fact, it will soon be tabled in the parliament, so that they can now be able to repeal some of the outdated laws we have in Chapter 114 of laws of Kenya.
But the problem is that those who say we have so good policies, so good laws in this country, the problem is implementation.
No, and that's what the nation of focal point, which was not there before, is actually ensuring. Because in every year, during the General Assembly or during the time of discussing the issues of small arms, Kenya must be able to report on what they have actually been able to do in terms of the implementation of this treaty. Now, at the regional level, we have what we call Nairobi Protocol on the prevention, control, and reduction of small arms. And 15 countries of this region have come together and signed a protocol. And this protocol now addresses the issues of small arms in 15 countries. And Kenya is actually hosting the secretariat. And that is the secretariat. I told you I was the executive director. In fact, I started it. And it is having members, representative from those 15 countries. And it's now overseeing the implementation of this particular protocol in all 15 countries.
As we bring this to an end, Dr. Sang, you say, going by research, there are about 560 to 650,000 illegal firearms. But we need to pacify northern part of the country that is a victim of this particular firearms. Do you think we have the capacity? Do you think we have the will to try and ensure that we try and take control of these illegal firearms so that the people of northern part of the country can feel we are secure moving forward?
I think the government is doing, we have to give credit to where it's actually due. More so at this particular time, where we have actually been able to see the semblance of the commitment by the government in terms of putting into place measures to address the problem of small arms in that particular region. And they have actually even gazetted that area as a disturbed area, whereby it really needs some measures to address that particular problem. And that's why this recruitment of KPR, why they are actually buying new vehicles, why they are giving more additional police officers. There have been actually recruitment of police officers now ongoing, and I believe some of them will actually be taken to those particular regions after having been able to be trained to deal with the unique problem of that particular region. And then also the issues of the politicians also will also be able to be made to understand that their leaders and whatever they utter may be a disaster, will cause disaster to those people whom they are actually leading. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Sang, for
Thank you
getting
very
time
much.
to be with us.
Thank you.
This is a discussion that we'll keep having. The author of the book, a noble but onerous duty,
Yes.
Dr. Francis Sang here, who is also former director of a criminal investigation department and is currently a member of the Committee on Citizen Participation in Security, CPS, talking to us about the whole question of illegal firearms. It's a question that we'll continue debating and discussing until we get it right as a country. Now that we are having new policies coming into place, we have the Kenya National focal point, among other institutions that they intend to create or establish as it were, to ensure that as a country we are more secure. My name is Martin Mwanje. We have been bombarding you with a lot of hard stuff. So we need to do some, bring you some entertainment so that at the end of the day, we ensure that your week comes to an end in style. Therefore, Samuel Njoroge is coming up next with more entertainment. Stay tuned to the program. Thank you.